Hey beautiful humans, I'm RidersDX and welcome to another riveting episode of Riders Replay, where today we get to put our emo glasses on. That's right friends, today we're talking about none other than Shadow the Hedgehog, the one figure in entertainment that makes black holes look like spa days. I mean, that was definitely true when I lived with my parents. I don't know if you all have noticed, but we are literally on the cusp of a Shadow-infused takeover, as Shadow is being set up to have a year of dominance and in-your-face darkness that is going to consume the year of 2024. But you may be wondering, why are there so many Shadow-focused projects this year? Well, that, my friends, can be pinpointed to three reasons. One, Shadow's fantastically orchestrated origin story, for the most part anyway. Two, the downfall of Shadow that occurred right after. And three, the perfect project to set up a true comeback of Shadow. So without further ado, let's get comfy and intimate in a platonic screen-to-screen fashion as we talk about Shadow's rise to fame. Before we can even get into why Shadow's about to have the most perfect comeback possible, we have to get into why Shadow is able to have a perfect comeback in the first place. So let's take a brief little history trip through the building blocks of Shadow himself. So according to my favorite source for any kind of legitimate information, Wikipedia, Shadow was created by Takashi Iizuka and Shiro Mikawa, who respectively served as director and writer of Sonic Adventure 2. According to Iizuka, Shadow originated from this idea while developing the original adventure, which was that Sonic Team wanted to introduce a rival for Sonic in a potential sequel. Eventually, while work on Sonic Adventure 2 progressed, Sonic Team found a purpose for Shadow when they laid out the game's good versus evil backdrop. Shadow's name at the beginning of development was actually Tyrios, which means reflection of, referring to his role as Sonic's doppelganger. More on this later. Sonic Team tasked Mikawa with developing Shadow, whom they wanted to look just as cool as Sonic. Mikawa settled on the design of a black hedgehog, but struggled coming up with his personality. One night though, while he brainstormed lines for a scene in which Sonic confronts Shadow for impersonating him, Mikawa came up with Shadow's first line.
I found you, Faker. Faker? I think you're the fake hedgehog around here. You're comparing yourself to me? Huh? You're not even good enough to be my those words.
Iizuka made sure that Shadow's introduction also brought new events to the game, as he wanted players to care about the character. And well, care about him players sure did, and so much more honestly. I wanted to follow back on Shadow's initial name Tyrios because the implications of this for what Shadow would become and what role he'd occupy in the franchise was forever cemented by this. You see, Shadow is nowhere near the first rival Sega has tried to create for Sonic. You had Eggman creating a bunch of contraptions to rival him, most notably Metal Sonic for instance, and this was a very straight to the point, direct duplicate of Sonic besides the fact that he's a robot. Thus, he matches Sonic's speed and abilities in many ways, but not a smidge of personality, at least at first. Then you had Knuckles, who had his own unique design and personality traits touted as a major rival to Sonic. And to be honest, this was a very successful creation of a rival as well, because Knuckles still to this day is one of Sonic's primary A-listers. So Shadow to me falls in between these two, as he does share a more similar appearance to Sonic, but he still has his own unique personality. But everything about Shadow is literally a negative reflection of Sonic. His quills curl up instead of down. He's apathetic to helping others unless it's directly in line with his goals. And he's not as straightforward as Sonic either, opting to be more reserved and secretive. And this classic yin and yang setup is often a successful trope in multiple forms of media, but Sonic and Shadow in particular really appealed to the little kids growing up around this time. I mean, that intro movie to Sonic Adventure 2 itself is injected with so much hype and anticipation for this rivalry done in a way you would have never been able to do with Knuckles. Cool doesn't even begin to describe your average visceral reaction to this. And I think this initial concept of Shadow being a reflection of Sonic served as an amazing foundation for what would go on to be one of the most beloved yet divisive characters of the series. So the public was hooked with the pure marketing of Shadow, but then the other piece of the puzzle to his everlasting popularity was of course Adventure 2 itself. So I know the story of Shadow is probably very well known at this point, but in case you didn't know, here's a quick Spark Notes rundown of what happened. Shadow was created by Professor Joe Robotnik through genetic engineering as part of an experiment to cure his granddaughter Maria from a deadly disease. While Shadow and Maria formed a strong bond, the government deemed him a threat due to his power. So one day, GUN, a military organization, invaded the space colony Ark where the research was being conducted. Maria would then trap Shadow in a capsule that would head towards Earth in order to help him escape, but in return, Maria was shot dead by one of the soldiers for defying his orders to not release Shadow. Shadow thus witnessed the death of his best friend and was then suspended in this capsule for 50 years completely frozen. Fast forward 50 years later, and Dr. Eggman learns of Shadow and revives him as part of his latest plan to conquer the world and defeat Sonic. Shadow agrees to help Eggman and frames Sonic for their evil deeds, leading to this iconic scene.
What? It all starts with this. A jewel containing the ultimate power. That's the Chaos Emerald! Now I know what's going on. The military has mistaken me for the likes of you. So, where do you think you're going with that emerald? Say something, you fake hedgehog! Chaos control! He's fast! Hey, it's not his speed. He must be using the Chaos Emerald to warp. Shadow, I'm the world's ultimate life form. There's no time for games. Farewell! Shadow, what is it?
Throughout the entire game, Shadow, Eggman, and Rouge, an undercover government agent trying to uncover the secrets of Shadow's past, work to collect the Chaos Emeralds to power one of Gerald's inventions at the Ark, the Eclipse Cannon. With all the emeralds, this cannon has the ability to eradicate planets, which Eggman plans to utilize to drain the world into submitting to his empire. By the end of the game, Eggman has successfully collected the emeralds and attempts to use the cannon, only for an error to occur, and thus, the true intentions of Shadow begin to rise. What collecting the emeralds for the cannon actually does is that it overrides the entire Ark system and forces it into a destructive path towards the Earth, creating an impact that would devastate millions of lives. Gerald Robotnik explains all this in a video that is broadcasted across the entire world, saying the reason for doing this was for vengeance against the government for murdering Maria and taking away his livelihood.
This is a death sentence for every human being on Earth. If my calculations are correct, the space colony Ark will impact the Earth in 27 minutes and 53 seconds. All of you will be destroyed, along with your beloved planet Earth. I plan to give you a taste of my revenge once all the 7 Chaos Emeralds are collected. Once I initiate this program, it cannot be disabled. All of you ungrateful humans who took everything away from me will feel my loss and despair.
Thus, this was always Shadow's true intentions, to carry out the word of Gerald and keep his promise to Maria to avenge her. While everyone else is racing to the core of the Ark to try and stop this impact though, Amy confronts Shadow and pleads to him for his help. Shadow is at first resistant to Amy, but as Amy keeps talking about the good in humanity, something Amy says triggers a memory in Shadow. Shadow then recalls what Maria's true message was, which was that she wanted Shadow to help people, stating that that's why he was created.
I know that people fight over the most trivial things. Some people may be selfish, like the professor said. But they're basically good if they try their best and never give up on their wishes. They always have a reason to be happy. That's why you should help them out. Saving them is a good thing. Shadow, I beg you, please do it for them. Give them a chance.
Shadow, I beg of you, please, do it for me.
Maria!
Future, for all people who live on that planet, give them a chance to be happy. Let them live for their dreams. Shadow, I know you can do it. That's the reason why you were brought into this world. Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
I promised her, and I must keep that promise. That's what Maria wished for. I've got to go now. I have to keep my promise to Maria. And
Then this pushes Shadow to join the others to stop the Ark. Of course, before we move on, we have to witness the absolute insanity that was this transformation scene. Sonic and Shadow turn super and fight the Bio Lizard, the prototype of Shadow. In an effort to stop the impending doom of the situation, Sonic and Shadow decide to perform Chaos Control to teleport the Ark to a safer location. However, the power required for this is quite immense, and Shadow gives everything he has to make it happen. Thus, after the two save the planet, Shadow falls to his alleged death.
Maria, this is what you wanted, right? This is my promise I made to you.
Sonic returns to the Ark and reveals that Shadow didn't make it, and the game ends on a very somber note.
Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog.
And well, history was made when this game came out. I mean, come on, I really did not do the story justice with this haphazard summary, but you can clearly see the firm foundations that make Shadow the popular character he is today. Not only is he a cool looking guy with a badass personality that made little boys glee with joy, but he also has a very well thought out and sensitive backstory that gives him clear intentions to explain why he's doing what he's doing, but also a past that helps him transform throughout the entire game into the Shadow we know and love today. If you couldn't tell, Shadow's meant to live and die in this game. But of course, Sega and Sonic Team could never have too much of a good thing. So now we get to go into what I like to call Shadow's downfall. Sonic Heroes would be the next mainline entry in the series and would also be the game to bring back Shadow the Hedgehog, except it really doesn't. What I mean by that is yes, Shadow is in the game and his existence is slightly questioned given the circumstances prior, but because Heroes overall was approached in a completely different way compared to the adventure titles, there was purposely and aggressively no care in the world paid towards the storyline. As a result, Shadow's return is really not explained at all, he's just back, is noted to have no recollection of who he is, and his arc ends in a vague hint at him potentially being an android. I don't really need to get into the pure frustration of his return being botched in this way, especially after the wonderful send-off he got in Adventure 2. But the way that Sonic interacts with Shadow as if it was just business as usual really does pour salt on the wound here.
Look, it's that hedgehog.
Wonder what the big rush is all about. Bet you those guys will end up getting in my way and making trouble.
Hey, isn't that...
Sonic!
Talk about being stubborn and full of surprises.
Long time no see, boys. Too bad you had to come all this way for nothing. We'll take it from here.
What'd you say?
Sensors locked on Eggman. Non-compliant intruders will be destroyed.
Didn't you know? We have a date with Eggman, too.
Is that so? Well then, it'll be a date to die for.
Hey, that's my line.
I mean, this is fun, but it's also complete nonsense. In Heroes' defense though, Sega is just getting started. Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, arrives with an initial purpose to answer for everything that Heroes glossed over in giving Shadow a true proper revival worthy of his popularity. We don't need to dwell on the gameplay aspects and all that, as I think that's a very well-treaded path on the internet. Shadow and guns? Bad. We've been new. But the storyline of the game gets almost as much flack because of the way it haphazardly throws in one of the most despised antagonists in the history of the Sonic franchise.
Shadow the Hedgehog. Why does that name haunt me? It's the only thing I can remember. And that gruesome image.
Maria!
Who am I? And why can't I remember anything? And who is this Maria? Look how pathetic they are. I don't have time for these humans.
As you can see, the day of reckoning will soon be here. Find the 7 Chaos Emeralds and bring them to me as promised.
Who are you, and how do you know I'm Shadow? And what are you talking about? Just what was that all about? If he says he knows the truth about who I am, then like it or not, I have to believe him. The only way I'm gonna get the secrets to my past is to get those Chaos Emeralds.
The Black Arms are an alien race that Shadow is forever connected to due to the fact that Shadow was created using the blood of these creatures. And this is supposed to equate to the reasoning GUN had for invading the space colony Ark and killing Maria, due to the fact that Gerald was corroborating with what would be considered terrorists. This is going to definitely be a controversial take, but I don't think the Black Arms are a bad addition to the legacy of Shadow. Sure, Black Doom is now my favorite villain out there. He lacks any sort of charisma and also looks like a fish pond. But this little factoid about Shadow's origins does add a bit of a layer to his story, because due to this discovery, it would make Shadow predestined to carry out the rule of the Black Arms. Shadow is technically heavily encouraged to be said terrorist, and this to me only further plays into the neutrality of Shadow's character and how much of the world has reason to fear him. It makes him unpredictable and more sternly the anti-hero of the series. I just think Black Doom's unlikable personality combined with the overall of this game really turns off even most Shadow fans from embracing this part of his origin. But I think looking at it in hindsight, the Black Arms connection does make sense for Shadow and could have been a really interesting narrative to tell if Shadow's game didn't turn out anything like it actually did. But I digress. The main goal of this game was to put an end to this arc for Shadow where he was trying to figure out his place and role in the universe after his alleged death. And whether you like the game or not, the way the story ends with Shadow determined to move on from this part of his life and to live the rest of his existence dedicated to helping others is honestly a very sensible way to tie it all up.
Goodbye forever, Shadow the Hedgehog.
Before we move on, can we just acknowledge how amazingly epic and nostalgic the super transformation scene is? Think this game would have been the sole reason for the downfall of Shadow, but the decline in Shadow's popularity and thus usage was actually tied to a much wider issue going on in the franchise. The next game may not necessarily tell us anything about Shadow's past, but the narrative of Sonic 06 actually gives us an amazing example of how Sega could continue to utilize Shadow without having to rely on him making out with his past constantly. In hindsight, Mephiles is a very interesting antagonist for Shadow because Mephiles' Shadow is sort of like what Shadow was to Sonic, i.e. a reflection of Shadow, but of course in a much darker way. Throughout Shadow's story, Mephiles tempts Shadow by exposing what he views to be cracks in Shadow's current psyche, trying to alarm Shadow about the fact that the people he's trying to protect will always see him as a threat that needs to be neutralized, which harkens back to his original use as a weapon and also to his connection to the Black Arms. But we also see Shadow's improved sense of self that he didn't have in the previous game, because now Shadow is outright defying everything Mephiles presents to him.
Perhaps it's better to show you. Yes, that's you. After the world was devastated by Iblis's flames, what do you think happened? A search for the guilty. Who did this, you may ask? Humanity wasn't just jealous of your power, they feared it. They used this incident as an excuse to hunt you down. Come with me, Shadow. Let us punish this foolish world of humanity. It's only fair to give back what was intended for you. You have every right to want justice.
That's absurd. Whatever it is you want to do, you can do it alone.
You forgive humanity this folly, then?
I determine my own destiny.
He acknowledges that Mephiles has a point about people seeing him as a danger, but in response, Shadow doesn't back down from what his personal purpose is and just reiterates he will fight as he always has. We even see this further tested within Shadow when it is revealed that his own friend Omega would in the future neutralize him due to the humans continuing to see him as a threat despite everything he has done to save the world. While this scene seems to only be here to egg on a point already made, it does add another layer to the isolation Shadow must feel from the world if even his own allies aren't immune from seeing him as a threat.
What just happened?
Shadow. The one that defeats and seals you in the future is me.
It's so unfair. Shadow's always here to defend the world. Despite that,
eventually, when something or someone is seen as too powerful, it is seen as a threat. And then the world becomes its enemy.
Shadow? Even if you believe everyone in the world will be against you, know that I'll always remain by your side. Remember that.
I will.
But despite this, Shadow continues to stick to his ultimate purpose, and that is just another example of the great character growth Sega could really be showcasing here when they're focused and know what to do with Shadow.
You must realize now that you cannot hope to stop me with your limited power.
So you say.
It's futile. The world will betray you. Why fight at all? Why risk your life for those who will persecute you later?
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.
The purpose of bringing up all this to you though is to give you a crash course into just why Shadow has become one of the most popular yet polarizing characters of this franchise. Shadow isn't simply a dark doppelganger of Sonic. He has his own story, background, and motivations that were especially dived into compared to other characters that helped his fanbase grow to where it is now. Shadow is also a huge symbol of an overall tonal shift in Sonic, going from the more wacky cartoony environments of the classic games into more realistic looking settings along with a darker, more dramatic story tone. And during this time, that darker tone was dog power on constantly, and Shadow unfortunately took most of the blunt for this back then just because of how tied he was to the shift in this franchise. And of course, when it was revealed to us just how terrible the rest of Sonic 06 was, this honestly was just the nail in the coffin for Shadow. Even though he was not connected directly to the shortcomings of 06, he was nonetheless a huge representative of what went wrong with Sonic. Thus, after the magnum opus that was Sonic 06, Shadow was practically delisted from the franchise, not having any major video game appearances for years. Shadow did go on to appear in Sonic Boom, but to be honest, this entire sub-series of Sonic further drove Shadow into oblivion. Ignoring the quality of the game Shadow was featured in, the way Shadow was characterized in the series is what I imagine little boys would write Shadow like in their low-effort fanfiction stories. Not that there's anything inherently bad about fanfiction as a whole, but Sonic Boom would strip Shadow of so many of his most beloved qualities I just is noted in favor of having a clear-cut antagonist to terrorize Sonic and his friends. While he was certainly entertaining and did fit the overall atmosphere of Sonic Boom, this was a Shadow not being dragged down by the confines of his past, but yet still acts like the badass Sonic met in Adventure 2 just without the somewhat justified reason for it. So all you have here is an asshole that may or may not be evil, but at least the further deterioration of Eggman's character whenever he did interact with Shadow was funny.
We're making history here! A collection of villains like this has never been assembled before!
I see no villains, just some fools whose only ability is wasting time.
That's something, isn't it?
No, not really.
Shadow's last major video game appearance was in Sonic Forces, but even in Sonic Forces, Shadow was still being somewhat relegated to a side role. He does have a playable section in this game, but it was basically de-emphasized through being promoted as a bonus DLC episode, rather than being a true integral part of the game. What's more damning is this episode, gameplay-wise, is really nothing that special. Shadow basically plays through 3 miniaturized versions of some of Sonic's levels that can be done within 10 minutes altogether, and beyond that, you get a few cringy cutscenes that try to emphasize the badass Shadow has always been touted as, but in reality, it just makes Infinite not seem all that infinite in any capacity.
Hey you! You know you can hear me. You're captain of Squad Jackal, aren't you? Your squad was useless. Go clean up their mess already!
Yeah, I got it. You destroyed my squad. I'll show you why they call me the ultimate mercenary. Take this! What?
Worthless. Don't show your pathetic face around me ever again.
I'm shaking. Me. Afraid. Pathetic. Me. He's calling me weak. No, I am not weak. I'm not weak. I am not weak.
Shadow did have other side game appearances, but it's clear Sega was trying to move the franchise away from him, and that was kinda sad to see looking back. The series was overall dwindling its cast down in size, though they at least moved up from just Sonic and Tails and started incorporating Knuckles and Amy a bit too. Mania, Frontiers, and Superstars were 3 more major Sonic games that came out around Forces and after. They were all also received quite well, though none of them actually featured Shadow. Shadow just seemed to forever be doomed to becoming a character like Blaze or Silver, beloved, though never to be utilized in any major form for the foreseeable future, and this is a fate that I simply would never stand for. So luckily, Sega came to their senses as well as they prepared for the renaissance of Shadow the Hedgehog. So before we can even get into 2024, we have to go back to 2022, which really just planted the seeds of this inevitable year we're about to see in the Sonic series. First off, the second Sonic movie. As we all know by now, the second Sonic movie ended with a mind-blowing cliffhanger that not only teased the introduction of a certain black hedgehog, but outright showed him waking up in the capsule. This was not a tease actually, this was in fact a promise that 2024 was going to be the year of Shadow. Later on in 2022, we got the premiere of Sonic Prime, a brand new Sonic show that heavily featured Shadow. Now sure, you could equate this to a similar amount of impact that Sonic Boom including Shadow had, but the main difference with Prime besides the screen time is that in this show, Shadow had regained his morally coded neutrality, and here's what I mean by that. Shadow hasn't always been an outright good guy in the same way Sonic and friends are, but he's always been a person that would do what he thought was the right thing to do, whether it be misguided or not. And Prime really did a good job of emulating this personality trait, as Shadow overall has the same goal as Sonic in the series, but his approach to doing it is largely different. And this to me was a very positive sign that if Sega were truly gearing up for a huge return of Shadow, they were doing their homework in terms of how to characterize him. Now we enter 2024, and along with the already confirmed release of the third Sonic movie, all that was truly missing was a mainline game starring Shadow. And what we got was kind of surprising but still fit the requirements. Sonic and Shadow Generations was announced early in January for a release in autumn, and not only is it a remaster of a very successful 3D Sonic title, but it is also a bundle of a separate story campaign starring Shadow himself. And in this campaign, following the theme of Generations, Shadow will be traveling to some of the previous locations that are key to his story, such as the Space Colony Arc and Radical Highway. Shadow will also be battling foes he's encountered such as the Bio Lizard and Black Doom. So no, it's not a brand new game starring Shadow, but it checks all the boxes in terms of a true and satisfying Shadow revival when it comes to the games. One, Shadow is the primary star of the project. Even if this part of the game is significantly shorter than the Generations portion, everyone is immediately going to focus on this part of the game anyway. Two, it opens up this great opportunity at introducing the public to everything there is to know about Shadow. By having Shadow travel to all these iconic locations tied to a story battling all these old foes, it not only serves as a great nostalgic nod for long-time fans, but also a fun historic overview for new ones. And to be honest, this is kind of a really smart and efficient move to put out a project when it comes to something that's focused on Shadow. You see, this is clearly not a full-fledged game. Ever since the gap between Forces and Frontiers, it's clear that Sega is now requiring Sonic games to be worked on for a longer period of time to ensure as solid of a quality as possible, as they've now realized they can't get away with selling shovelware anymore in the age of social media. Word of mouth is a powerful weapon, my friends. But optimizing profits would still require a regular stream of releases under the Sonic brand. So instead of new rush games every single year, Sega is taking advantage of Sonic's long history by utilizing remasters and remakes a lot more than they used to, much like most of the industry to be honest, which is a whole nother discussion for another day. But now Sega is bundling a remaster of what's probably a much smaller project than an actual game, but still an idea that would garner a lot of interest from both Sonic and non-Sonic fans. It truly is a win-win situation, I gotta say. But of course, the real reason this project is going to have so much interest in the first place is of course the third Sonic movie, which comes out in December. Needless to say, as hyped as I am for Sonic and Shadow Generations, the third Sonic movie is truly going to eclipse that project unless that game turns out to be way more than what I'm seeing. The third Sonic movie is going to put Shadow at the forefront of the public once again and reintroduce him in a way we haven't seen since the original Adventure 2. And to be honest, as we've discussed already, as long as they stick to the pure exoskeleton of Sonic Adventure 2's plot, but of course not let it sound nearly as awkward, the movie has everything it needs to be the best movie of the three. Shadow is going to introduce a whole new dimension to the Sonic movies. We already saw the second movie begin to engage in slightly more intense and mature themes as Sonic had to grow up to take on a much bigger threat. Shadow is just going to push the envelope even more, especially if the memes about a little girl getting murdered in this movie are anything to go by. I'm really just seeing the entire vision board Sega probably drew up at this point years ago, and I am honestly shook. So we've gone through it all. We reminisce about the good old days, we took a brief overview of the bloodshed done afterwards, and now we've reached the present where things seem to finally be going up again for Shadow. And I bring all this up because as important as a good origin is for a comeback, the downfall, I would argue, is just as important, if not more. For the longest time, Shadow has been the mascot of everything wrong with the Sonic series in the 2000s. The games are better in 2D, the stories are too complicated now, they're trying to add too much into the games that don't suit Sonic. Shadow was the punching bag for all this, being the main breakout star during this period in time. So that's why I argue, if anything, Sonic 06 was most devastating towards Shadow's place in the franchise, as he had gone from a required presence in every mainline Sonic game to really not doing anything noteworthy until this coming year. But you see, this is why a comeback is now one of the easiest pathways for Shadow to undergo. When you reach the lowest of lows, all you can do is just go back up from there. If you take this predicament and formulate the right steps, then you have the opportunity to have the public fall in love with this character once again. And Sega and Paramount seem to be taking all those steps in the best way possible, as everything I'm seeing from them so far shows to me that they understand what made Shadow the icon he was in the early 2000s. It wasn't just a badass hairdo and abilities, it wasn't the fact they gave him guns, it was the heartfelt foundation Iizuka and Makawa originally envisioned for him. The seemingly villainous reflection of Sonic who was actually operating under a false pretense in honor of a fallen friend he was trying to live for. That scene between Shadow and Amy will forever go down as one of my favorite moments in the series, as it truly shows how broken Shadow is on the inside, and is a stemming point for so many more amazing moments that come from Shadow afterwards, despite how rocky his narrative was after this game. With the new game and movie seemingly primed to retell parts of Shadow's story, I just hope the signs are correct and these companies do truly get what makes Shadow the amazing character he is, and create a modernized and perfected retelling of his origins. If y'all enjoyed this video, then let me know in the comments. It's kind of nice to just sit back, not do any insane gymnastics or whatever, and just talk nerdy video game stuff. Anything you'd like to see me chat about on these sorts of videos, let me know please. The Overlord is really demanding more continuous output from me, so any ideas are truly welcomed. But anyway y'all, this is Riders, riding out. And well, history was made when this game